welcome to the Open Minds podcast, the podcast where we speak to people who exemplify having an open mind and who are doing their bit amongst their fellow human ecosystem and the community around them to make the world around them a better place. And today's guest is no exception to that. Her name is Anne Rodgers. She's a mindfulness trainer and facilitator and founder of Oasis Mindfulness, and has worked at some fascinating organisations such as Mindfulness Works Australia and Smiling Mind, which I'll be asking her all about. But Anne, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Paul. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much for agreeing to come on board.
Mm-hmm.
I guess for the listeners' benefit, Anne, I really was keen to get someone with your background in mindfulness on board, particularly because of this crazy year that people have been going through, and people's wavering mental health, and in addition to perhaps demystifying some of the myths around mindfulness, and ultimately perhaps towards the end of our conversation together we'll give some value to the listeners out there about how they can practice it and use it to their advantage. But I thought, Anne, to start off with, I just wanted to ask a little bit about your story and how you came across mindfulness.
Okay. Well, in 2013, I decided that I had enough of my corporate life and that I needed to do something different. But it actually originated as a managing director of an advertising agency, where in 2008, you might recall the GFC.
Of course,
Yeah. So obviously budgets were squeezed and there were limitations on how many people could service clients and things like that. So that's when I really felt the crunch. And I'd been quite successful up to that point. I was running a company in Adelaide with, we were billing about $100 million. I had 50 staff. So I felt quite successful. And when the GFC came, for the next 5 years, there was a lot of pressure. And I felt that I didn't have any resources. And at the time, I through my CEO, I had to provide the continued service with clients, and I just felt that I wasn't capable of doing that. And I sort of I was the pin cushion. I was getting all the pinpricks from the CEO, and sort of had to protect the staff around that.
Right, I'm with you. And when you say resources, what are you referring to there?
Well, mainly there was a hire freeze, so we were still getting the same demand, and in fact the business was growing, but I couldn't hire any more staff. So that was really putting everyone under pressure. And I got to a point where I just couldn't think clearly. I was so nervous and so anxious. And I realised that when I look back on that time, when I say I couldn't think clearly because of the pressure, it was really I couldn't hear myself think because of all the clutter in my mind, and I was very scrambled. And I was really, I think I was just coming from my nervous system in this sort of agitated way. So whilst I felt that I'd been quite successful up to a certain point and felt quite resourced and calm and present, all of a sudden I was tipped over. So, that ability not to think clearly spiraled me, and my thinking started to get very critical and very negative. And I started to think in some ways I was a fraud. And when I was reaching out for help, it just wasn't available. So in the form of more relief on being able to run the business in the way that I was used to, all of a sudden all those boundaries started to restrict me. And so I felt really, really closed in. And that's when I started to feel signs of anxiety. Yeah, and that wasn't pleasant.
I can imagine. Just on that point, Anne, like when you say, you were tipped over, that tipping point, can we perhaps elaborate on that, and perhaps were there any physical manifestations in your health, just so other people who perhaps are going through the same thing, might have a fair idea as to what that looked like for you?
Yes, well, I couldn't have anyone in my office with the door closed. So I had to have the door open. As soon as they closed the door, I felt claustrophobic,
right,
and anxious and nervous and sweaty, heat. And when I never really liked public speaking. I don't know that anyone really does, particularly earlier in their careers. And of course, I had to speak quite a bit, do a lot of presentations. And then I started to, because I was doubting myself with my thoughts and my thinking, that was coming across in my presentations. And then all of a sudden, I'd be fearful of being nervous. So I sort of had this cycle going where I was, fear of the fear. And, and then that reflected upon my credibility. I couldn't get my case across soundly, and I was just continually. I felt like I was nervous. I wasn't sleeping. But it was the thinking, the spiral of the thinking, that I was just not worthy of the job anymore. And so I really felt in a bad place that I couldn't get out of. And my CEO was just, doing his job. But I felt that in some ways I was blaming him. And I've now realised that I cannot blame someone else for my own feelings. So that's what I've learned through my training now in mindfulness. But back then I couldn't see that. I couldn't see that at all. I used to blame him all the time. Woe is me. It was always his fault. And that just helped fuel the anxiety. So I really felt unresourced, completely unresourced. And I just went into this vortex. And I got to a point where I had to resign.
Right, okay.
So when I resigned, I had a fairly big mortgage, and I'd had my house on the market for 2 years, and I couldn't sell it because I knew I had to leave because I was so unhappy. And I just left anyway. I just resigned. And as soon as I resigned, I got 2 contracts on my house.
Right, okay.
So that was meant to be.
Amazing. And how did you stumble? Was it this period that you came across mindfulness, Anne, or were you aware of it?
I took some time off. Took 3 months off at that stage, and I decided to take up yoga. So I always knew that yoga was something that helps people physically, mentally, and emotionally. And because I dabbled in it on and off over the years, so I decided to join a yoga studio. And through that process, I signed up for the yoga teacher training course. And so I went from a managing director of an ad agency to doing a yoga teacher training course, and now I'm a yoga teacher. So the goal wasn't to be a yoga teacher; it was to be to learn really about personal development. And so then I started to meditate as part of my training. And then I realised that I was getting some benefit from meditating. And one of our training teachers was a professor at a local university, and he's a yogi, and he invited the training teachers to a mindfulness symposium. I thought, well, that sounds interesting. So I went along, and after that day, I was hooked because I could see the science behind mindfulness. I had come from a place of adversity. I had experienced anxiousness and anxiety, and so I could see a light. So then I investigated what I needed to do to become a mindfulness teacher, and so that journey started in 2016. So I signed up with the Mindfulness Institute of Australasia.
Right, okay.
And did an intensive 2-year training, which
Right.
involved I had to go and do a silent retreat for 6 days. And
How did you find that?
not too bad. I nearly died when they said that we couldn't read. I thought, well, what else am I going to do?
Alone with your thoughts, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, it was an interesting time.
Yeah.
But then I realised, I started to realise what I was telling myself with my thoughts, and I really started to
become more self-aware.
Yes, yes, I was starting to open up and yeah, started to know myself a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned meditation there, and you said you were noticing some of the benefits that came along with that. What were they?
Well, when you actually sit and pause, what you're doing is you're becoming more aware of the state you're in, and just through the natural act of breathing, each breath that I took as part of the practice of meditation, I could feel my body relaxing. I could feel more at ease, because what we're doing is we're activating or interrupting the fight flight part of our nervous system, and coming into that rest digest part of the nervous system.
Yes.
And so I could feel my tension. So just when I paused and just started to focus on my breath, I could actually literally feel my shoulders just relax and my face soften. Because a client said to me once, "And why don't you ever smile?" And I thought, "Oh, don't I?" And then it was like I could actually literally feel my face just dropping where every time I paused, because I was conscious of just the gripping of my jaw, my brow.
Yep.
Just bringing awareness to the body has so much power.
Yep.
And so that meant that when I was out and about through my life, I'd say, okay, well, how am I holding myself now? Am I smiling or not? And then I'd bring that conscious awareness. So every time I meditated, I felt more connected to myself, and I started to see more.
Yes.
I started to feel more.
Yeah.
And that gave me information and a realization about my self-beliefs, about how I was actually feeling in that moment and why. Like it gives you time to reflect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that self-awareness set piece is the first step to changing any limiting behaviors.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, most definitely. And for those listeners who perhaps aren't well versed in mindfulness, or who perhaps are just discovering it, how would you very simply define it for them?
Okay. Well, in some ways, what we're doing is we're pressing the play button. So we're living life through pressing play, rather than pressing the fast forward, where we're projecting ourselves into the future, the unknown, or we've pressed the rewind button and going over stuff that's happened in the past, that looping, that ruminating. So when you can press the play button, you are living through life. And so you're being present to what's actually happening. And this is the practice, because often our minds wander so much. Whilst our body's here, our mind isn't.
Yeah.
So I can even be responding to you, Paul, and my mind can be thinking about something else. Maybe there's a critical thought coming in.
Yes.
Or what you're saying, no one's going to believe, Anne. So I'm not present, am I? If I've got this judgment going on, or if perhaps I'm sitting here and all of a sudden I've been dancing all weekend, and all of a sudden I can feel pain in my foot, and that takes me off. Oh, gee, that was a great weekend, and then I've lost contact with you. So mindfulness is about being present fully, so that you're thinking, you are finding the space to be able to be present. And in some ways, what you're doing is you're starting to be more, I suppose, open. Yeah. So rather than predicting what this podcast or this interaction is going to be like, just opening to the experience and being totally in a space where you are listening and not thinking about the next thing that I'm going to say. And so we really do open up more when we start to be mindful. Because we're practicing bringing the mind back to the present moment when we do our formal meditation practice. And so really what we're doing, I mean, the neuroscientists call it like a mental exercise. So we keep bringing the mind back. Okay, I'm here. I'm connecting with Paul. I'm responding to his questions. I'm not thinking about what I'm going to do later today because the mind's very, very busy, and this is why people are looking to have more clarity around this flow of connection with the moment. And so you can be connected to whatever you're doing, whether it's cooking, singing, looking after a child. If you're fully present, it just gives you a different sensation. Totally different sensation. Because we waste half of our lives through being elsewhere in our minds.
Agreed. And I think that was also corroborated in Harvard Uni study a couple of years ago, right?
Yes, that's well. It's used a lot, isn't it?
It is. It says, half our waking lives are either thinking about stuff that's happened in the past or may not transpire in the future. And I think the paper suggested that it's this mind wandering. What the Buddhists call the monkey mind, right? That is the root cause of a lot of people's unhappiness.
But one thing that I just want to say is what we're doing with mindfulness is increasing our consciousness. So we have this wandering mind. The psychologists call it the automatic pilot of the mind. So that's when, like, we're reading a book and we get to the end of the page, we've forgotten what we've read. Or we've eaten a meal and we can't remember actually eating it. So that's where when our mind wanders and it takes us away from the present moment. So what we want to do when we practice mindfulness, we want to choose where the mind spends its time. So if we choose to plan for a trip to Bali, I wish, we can. So we're consciously planning a trip to Bali. So it's not as if we don't not go into the future. We just want to be conscious of whatever we're doing. And so what we're doing is we're expanding consciousness.
Right. Okay.
And this is why it's important to pause often to really check in to what is it that you're thinking and feeling in this moment. So that you can start to understand how you behave and start to be more conscious of the words that come out of your mouth. And the tone.
Makes perfect sense. I read somewhere that the bulk of our thoughts during the day derive from the subconscious, right? 90 to 95% of those thoughts, that subconscious program. That was more or less laid, I think, and a lot of people still don't know, in those first 7 to 8 years of our lives, right? When our brain is doing things for the first time. And those foundations were really laid for your beliefs, your view of the world, concept of self-identity. And I think, another reason as to why so many people are struggling, and I would submit particularly that the younger generation, and I think that was confirmed too in some study, I think it was 18 to 26-year-olds have really struggled the most through this COVID crisis.
Yes, that's right.
So again, I think, practicing, as you say, mindfulness and meditation can really help change that it's not even an equilibrium, but change that weight between the subconscious and just, bringing up the level of consciousness a lot more. But speaking of that younger generation, Anne, I saw that one of your previous roles, I think in 2018, was with Smiling Minds. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I've been working for them not a lot, I have to say, but that is opening up now with the online opportunity. But I've done some work with a corporate company in introducing mindfulness into the workplace.
Right.
And I've also helped or did a presentation to a college of 100 teachers at the beginning of their school year,
right,
for them to be introduced to the program. I mean, Smiling Minds has a fantastic educational program that is all free, and it's funded by grants and also funded by the corporate money that is spent on corporate programs.
Right.
So they have done an extensive amount of work based on introducing mindfulness to different school ages.
Yes.
So that because of the brain's development, it needs to be introduced in different ways. So anyone can download that app and see that full school program, that curriculum. And so Smiling Mind have created these class plans for the teachers,
right? Okay.
And then given them some training on how to introduce it to students. So it's a fabulous program,
which I think is amazing. You know, I don't think you can ever be too young to practice mindfulness. I think the earlier, the better. I wish you know we had it when we were at high school.
Oh, yes.
But I think what this age group is really, what differentiates them from perhaps, you know, when we were at school, was this influx of digital information, right, that they're exposed to, and
that's right.
External pressures, the internal pressures, the bullying that doesn't stop in the schoolyard, you know, if they're glued to their devices. So how can mindfulness help this age demographic, Anne, do you think?
Well, just firstly, there's a theory that says that we haven't evolved quick enough for the technology we've created. So that's why there's such a broad interest now in mindfulness. I'm not an expert in introducing mindfulness to children, so I can't say that I am. But from what I know, is that it needs to be presented in a fun way.
Yeah.
And certainly not to be forced upon any child. And ideally, it needs to be presented by a teacher that has an understanding and is practicing mindfulness.
Yes.
Because if you're practicing mindfulness, you're modeling the benefits, and you are the benefits.
I agree.
And so you've got more awareness, and you can be more supportive, have more empathy.
Yes, yeah.
And yes, so definitely presented by someone that has an appreciation of mindfulness.
Yes.
I did a presentation once to a group of people, and in that presentation was an ex-teacher.
Right.
And I did a guided meditation. And afterwards she said to me, I can't believe that I feel this way. And she used to play the tape for the meditations in the classroom. And then while that was going on, she'd be doing a little bit of her own stuff. And so she missed that opportunity to connect with those children in that way. And it wasn't until she actually gave herself permission to be there for the practice that she actually realized what mindfulness could do.
Isn't that interesting? Wow. Yeah. And what's the overlap between mindfulness and meditation? How would you differentiate the two?
Okay. Well, in some ways, meditation is a noun, the act of meditation, and mindfulness is the verb.
Right.
So there is definitely overlap, because you use mindfulness in meditation because you need to be mindful of where your mind is during meditation. Yeah. And so meditation is like a formal practice where you dedicate some time to meditate. Whereas mindfulness can, like I said, you use mindfulness when you're meditating, because you need to be aware of when your mind wanders. And the moment that you notice your mind wanders, that is mindfulness. So you're aware your mind's wandered. with mindfulness, you can also practice on the run in your life.
Right.
So as long as you set the intention to be mindful, because if you don't, you'll just behave in your conditioned habitual way, where you're not noticing. So mindfulness is about being present to whatever you're doing. Like I said before, if you're cooking a meal, you're present to cooking a meal.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
If you're present in the shower, like most often, when people are in the shower, they're not in the shower on their own. They've already started their meeting.
Yeah.
They've already gone over the night before. They've got people in there. So mindfulness is the ability to pay attention and to continue that attention.
Right, okay.
So if you're in the shower, you are in the shower.
Yeah.
So you've got the water, you can hear the water, smell the water, you can feel the body soap on your skin. Like that is, you've got 5 minutes in the shower. So why not be mindful of having your mind where your body is?
Yes.
And then if you decide that you are going to plan for your meeting, then you think about that. But often people get in the shower and they're already in the meeting without that conscious awareness of, okay, I'm going to think about and plan my day now.
Yes, yeah.
And this is what happens. The mind whisks us away because it's so conditioned, so habitual that we lose the ability to be the master of our mind.
Yes.
And at the moment, most people are the slaves of their mind.
Yeah.
So we want to turn that around. We want to be masterful so that we choose to place the mind where we want to direct it. So think of the mind like a puppy. So the mind needs training.
Yeah.
And they're like puppies.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there is a difference. I mean, you wouldn't, you meditate with the intention of sitting still. Now, when we say sitting still, the body's still.
Yeah.
However, thoughts are moving, feelings are moving. We feel sensations in the body like tension or aches. That's moving. So we have this experience of movement, of transience, of arising and passing, but the body is relatively still.
Right, okay.
So what we're cultivating is this sense of non-reactivity.
Right.
So that we can be non-reactive to some of the thoughts that come in.
Sure.
That might be critical or so, okay, let that thought be there and then come back to your breath.
Yep.
Or whatever it is that you're meditating as an anchor or as an object. Okay, that thought can still be there.
Yep.
But I'm focusing on my breath.
Right, okay.
So that helps us when we go about our days. Okay, I'm going to focus now on doing this plan for my manager.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that makes us more productive.
Yeah.
So we've got a higher level of concentration.
Yeah, yeah. I hear what you're saying. So in both, really, it's being entirely present, raising that level of consciousness in the present moment. But so what I'm hearing is with the meditation, there's still that exercise of control over your thoughts, but you're reducing them to one or two things, whether it's the breath or an object. Whereas mindfulness, that awareness is, yes, it's anchored in the here and now. But if you're aware, as you said in the shower, of you thinking about your meeting and you're entirely present, then that's still practicing mindfulness.
Yeah. So if you can just direct your thoughts to whatever it is that you're engaged with at that time.
Yes.
Then that is being mindful.
Yeah.
It accelerates with your meditation practice.
I'm with you. Okay.
So we can't control our thoughts. The thoughts are going to be there regardless.
Yeah.
And they can be quite powerful.
Yes.
So we practice this stepping back from our thoughts.
Yeah. So we're
meditating.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're the awareness behind our thoughts, right?
Yeah. So we get used to these crazy thoughts that come through, but it doesn't mean to say that you need to react to them or to take them as truth.
Yeah. Exactly.
And this is what happens. We don't do a lot of thought hygiene.
Yeah.
We just run we're blindly driven by our thoughts because they've been there for years and years and years and years.
Exactly.
And we believe them, even though the seed of it might have come when we were very young.
Yeah.
But we've believed it all those years.
Correct.
And we've built this sort of snowball that it's just part of us.
Exactly. It's part of the subconscious program, right? And
that's right. And
get attached to it.
It's noticing your identity. Okay. Because we've become self-identified with our thoughts. So in some ways, when you start to practice, rather than you be your thoughts, so like your thoughts can be here, your thoughts start to be here.
Yes.
So when you've got more space, you can see things a lot clearer.
Yes.
And this is what happens when you practice.
Yeah.
So, okay, you're not driven by these thoughts. They're not part of you. You can actually see them for what they are.
Yes, yeah.
And that's the power.
I love that, Anne. I think there's a lot of value in that if you can disassociate, and it's easier said than done, but I'm gathering it comes with that consistency, right?
It does. And you're actually decentering rather than disassociating, because we don't want to move out of our bodies. We want to be present to our bodies. Yeah, but you're sort of decentering. Okay, I can see now from a more panoramic view, the broader perspective,
right?
Rather than it sort of coming where we can't see it. And so when we meditate, it helps us create a little bit more space for those thoughts to be there. And okay, so I'm telling myself something that I know is not really true.
Yes.
But then you start to believe it when it's so persistent, and and so you start to, instead of responding in a reactive way, you start to step back and create a little bit of space to respond in more of a responsive way.
Right. Okay.
So you start to make some wiser choices because you're seeing stuff. You're actually becoming more knowledgeable about your body and your mind.
Exactly. You're seeing things from more of an objective bird's eye perspective, right?
Correct.
And that reminds me of this great little tool I've recently stumbled across, Anne, and I've been practicing. It's part of the Vipassana meditation, which translates to insight meditation. And, you know, a lot of the obstacles that people face when they're first starting meditation is either they're too time poor, can't keep their thoughts still, so perhaps they might throw meditation in the too hard basket. But this is a little tool I've been teaching my coaching clients, which is really useful, and I think complements exactly what you've been saying. And I don't know if you've come across it, but very simply, when you're sitting, practicing mindfulness or meditation, you know, like you said, you start with the intention, and then you might be sitting there observing the breath. And when those thoughts enter, you know, and take place in a form of an inner narrative, what you do is you exercise coming from a place of acceptance and curiosity. So instead of trying to suppress them, you identify the thought, right? So, for instance, if I hear a car going by and my sole objective is to focus on my breath, I will, because we know the brain is really designed to process every bit of information that comes into it. So instead of getting angry that this has taken over my inner narrative, I would say, okay, that was a car going by. And then you proceed to give it a little gentle label such as, that was me hearing. That was me hearing.
Yeah.
If you have a thought train that gets away from you, go along with it, accept it, and tell yourself, okay, so that was me. That was me thinking. That was me thinking. That was me feeling. And then you bring it back to the breath. Right?
That's right. Beautiful. That's exactly right. You could call it, you could label what it is that is distracting you.
Yes.
So if it is a thought that comes in, you could label it worry, or you could label it fantasizing, or catastrophizing.
Yeah, and I think the reason that's so important, you're actually causing this divergence between what your conditioned self is, your conditioned behavior, and like we said, becoming the awareness behind that. And from that platform, you know, we know the science behind mindfulness. We strengthen that prefrontal cortex, and it's from that platform you can exercise, like you said, a new, more responsive, more rounded response to a situation at hand.
See, sometimes it just requires a breath. Just, I mean, it's a silly, you know, it's such a platitude, isn't it? Just take a breath. my mother says that to me all the time. She doesn't. And I think there's so much power in that. Because that just because your prefrontal cortex goes offline, and that's when you're a bit scrambled. But just that breath brings the prefrontal cortex back online, and because that is the regulator of our emotions. And when that little fear detector goes off at the amygdala in the brain, so if we can just sort of take that breath, it just brings it back online, and then you can think more clearly. So just that beat, it could be a millisecond.
Yes.
And so that may just stop you from saying something that closes someone else out.
Yes.
So, or perhaps you then think, no, I won't say that. I'll ask this.
Yes.
Or maybe you've noticed that you're starting to be defensive.
Yeah.
Well, that's not going to be warming to anyone.
Yeah.
So you think, okay, I'm just going to take a breath and chill here for a moment.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a lot of possibility around what we call these pivot points or choice points.
Yeah.
Where just because you're practicing this non-reactivity, okay, I'm going to practice non-reactivity because I know my emotions are building.
Yeah.
I'm just going to sit with those emotions for a moment, allow my prefrontal cortex to come back online. And of course, all this happens very quickly.
Exactly.
But the more you practice, research says, the more you practice, the more you benefit.
Yeah.
So this is from my own experience. I am now able to speak confidently in public. I'm now able to notice my emotional charges when they start to rise. And so then I've got my own strategies that I can put in place.
Right, okay.
But previously, that was just habitual. I was conditioned, reactive. So now I'm more regulated. I can understand my own psyche. I can understand the way I behave because I know what my triggers are, and I know what my impulses are.
Yeah.
The words, the words that I'm starting to use, right? Okay, probably not appropriate. So then I would reel back on that.
Yeah.
So this is where it's helped me.
Yeah. Amazing, Anne. I think you just answered my question, which is how can it help people as they're going through their day-to-day busy life? But I love the fact you also touched on that emotional set piece, which brings about this overlap with emotional intelligence, right?
Oh, yes. Mindfulness is definitely the foundation of emotional intelligence.
Yeah. That self-awareness.
Because what we're doing is we're building a little bit of a space between that trigger and reaction, and by doing that, we turn it into a response rather than a reaction.
Right. Okay.
So that gives us wise choices.
Yes.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. And
just like that, just that whole physiological thing of that prefrontal cortex back online. Okay, I can think clearly now.
Yeah. And I guess it all takes place between that stimulus response gap, right?
It does.
Yeah. Because I was going to ask you, like, what do perhaps people are listening to this and thinking, okay, this sounds fantastic. How can I start practicing it? But what do I do when I do find myself in a heightened situation, in the eye of the storm, so to speak, when the emotions are charged? Is it a matter of that consistency to build up to bring you that ability in that moment, or is there anything they can do in that moment?
Look, everything you do in life is something you can learn from.
Yeah.
But often we don't stop and pause and reflect.
Exactly.
And not only reflect, but take like a barometer reading of how do I really feel about this?
Yes.
What's happened to me? What's just happened?
Yeah.
And so you learn from that.
Yeah.
So that the next time you're in that situation, you've got more knowledge,
more information,
more data. And this is what the practice brings us, this opportunity to really get to know how you're using the curriculum of life to improve yourself.
I love that.
But unless you pause and stop, which is something that I teach, and is quite often used, but you have to remember to do it, which is to at least pause 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And even if you just took 3 conscious breaths and just checked in and asked yourself, what am I thinking and feeling in this moment?
This moment. That's a great tip. Would you suggest to listeners that they schedule those 3 periods or do it randomly?
Either or. But the thing is, maybe schedule it to a routine that might just help anchor, okay, I've got to remember to do this.
Yes.
So I teach the stop, which is you stop, which is the S, and you take stock. So you're actually, okay, what am I thinking and feeling?
Right.
The T is you take a breath.
Right. I love it.
And you then tether your mind to where you can feel the breath in the body and just breathe from that place. So, it could be the belly or the chest.
Right.
And then the O is to then open and observe. So we're sort of stopped. We've checked into how we are.
Yeah.
We've taken a few breaths. And then we've opened and observed. And so we're observing our full body. And then the P is to proceed with possibility.
Love it.
So, and that's literally taking 3 breaths, checking in.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I'm going to observe myself in this broader, that sort of panoramic perspective. Okay. And then move on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Anne. They were wonderful tips. I really love that acronym STOP. What advice would you give to people who are struggling, perhaps with the lockdown around the world, who are perhaps feeling isolated, perhaps feeling that stress response daily? I know that you've had some experience is it John Kabat-Zinn's Mindfulness Stress Reduction based program?
Yes, I teach that.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that and any advice you might give people who are really feeling stress on a daily basis.
Okay. Well, if they're not already practicing, that means they're starting from a position of no resources in that way. Really, I think moving in some ways is going to help people. And one of the practices that we do in the mindfulness-based stress reduction course is based on walking meditation and moving the body.
Right.
And I think that to realistically ask people to sit and meditate when they don't have a teacher or a guide to introduce into the practice, just to even move the body and to be totally aware of the body moving. So walking meditation is you can walk around the house and just walk slowly and feel your feet in the floor and use the sensation of the weight moving from one foot to the other and just slowly moving around. You can find a corridor or walk around a room, walk in your garden. So just this act of walking slowly, because when you slow down, you start to notice more.
Right.
And when you start to notice more, you might start to appreciate the simple things in life. So try the walking meditation. There would be guides on that. You could do that.
Yeah.
Or the other practice is to activate your 5 senses.
Right.
So maybe go outside and start with sight and have a look around and look at your surroundings. You could even do it inside, even if you're in quarantine.
Right.
And look at the visual aspects of objects. And rather than evaluating, analysing them, look at them with curiosity and start to notice the shapes, the colours, the textures, the dimensions.
Yeah.
And so what you're doing is you're activating a different part of our physiological system.
Right.
And so that then connects people in a different way beyond thoughts, because we don't want to have our experiences through thoughts. We want to invite our feelings into it as well. But often people are having experiences through the thinking mind only.
Yes.
So we want to balance it and activate our senses.
Right. Okay.
So then you just stand and listen to sound.
Yeah.
So and maybe listen to sound in a way that you're listening to the tone, the vibration, feeling the sound. So in other words, sound without labels.
Yeah.
So that you don't go off into a story. Come back to the volume, the pitch, the tone, and then smell. What are you picking up? So particularly if you've been in the same environment, maybe you haven't actually smelled what's around you. Go out in the garden and smell the flowers. Then sensation of touch. So you could feel your feet on the grass, or you could just feel the air on your skin.
Yeah.
You could feel the clothing on your skin or jewelry. You could feel your hands touching. So come into the sensation of touch, and then taste. You could you don't even have to eat. You could just come to the awareness of what taste do I have in my mouth? Is it fresh? Am I getting the residue from that beautiful breakfast I just had?
Do I need to brush my teeth?
Yeah, exactly. So that's what you do. You go through your 5 senses.
Right.
That's practice.
Yep. I love that. I love that. It's so simple, but I think the older we get, we almost become desensitized to our environment, and we filter out a lot of these nuances that we paid closer attention to as children. So by doing that, just activating your 5 senses, like you said, you're activating different parts of the brain and really anchoring that consciousness in the here and now.
That's right. That's why they say stop and smell the roses.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot in that.
Yes.
And I didn't realise there were roses until I left my corporate career. I just did not see them.
Yeah.
I was too busy rushing to the next moment.
Yeah.
I wasn't living the current moment. In fact, I was leaving before I arrived.
Yes. Yeah.
So this is what mindfulness teaches us.
Yeah.
What am I missing?
Yeah. And isn't it interesting that when you get that consistency under your belt, you're becoming more self-aware. It literally transforms every other facet of your life, right?
It does.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit like, when you go to the gym and you do a bit of a workout, let's say 45 minutes, you don't actually feel an immediate result. Like you actually feel good for the whole day, don't you? It sort of gives you those endorphins. And so you don't realize that going to the gym has an after effect.
Yeah.
And this is what happens when you start to practice mindfulness and do your meditation practice.
Correct.
You have these after effects and things start unfolding. You start noticing more. You start to be more conscious of what's going on around you. Yeah. And you can engage in a different way.
Yeah, most definitely. And there were some real golden nuggets in everything you said today. And I really appreciate, the advice around the STOP acronym, which I think was magnificent. Pause during the course of your day, even if you have to schedule, 3 times or what have you, the walking meditation and activating the 5 senses. So I think for anyone listening out there, perhaps struggling with life, whether it's in your work environment, your COVID conditions, even if they just take on board 1 or 2 of those things, make that a daily habit.
Yeah.
As Anne said, you won't notice the effects straight away, but after a few weeks, I believe there will be a slight shift in the way you approach things, and that feeling a lot calmer, less judgmental. So, and we know, don't we, Anne, that the science is behind. There have been thousands of studies, right, on mindfulness and meditation now. Yeah.
Certainly with the introduction of all those MRI machines and imaging and it certainly has been documented now. Even though for thousands of years people have been meditating.
Correct. That's the irony in it, right? Yeah, brilliant. And is there anything that I haven't asked you that perhaps you'd like the listeners
you were going to touch on that psychological safety.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you want to go there or not, but just briefly, that's something that I've got a real passion about.
Yeah, maybe just quickly, like in a work context, because I know you do a lot of work with corporates, and I think people do struggle in their day-to-day work life, so to speak. So maybe just if you could, let the listeners know what psychological safety means and why it's so important. That'll be great.
Yeah, well, everyone wants to do their best, and to do the best means that perhaps you make mistakes because that's how you learn. And often in a work environment, you don't feel supported enough to make mistakes and then be with the fallout that comes with that. Yeah. So psychological safety is about not creating a work environment where you don't feel threatened, where you don't feel defensive, where you feel as if you're doing your best in a safe way, and that you have leaders that give you that space to do that. So what you're doing is you're getting the collective intelligence of all of your team because they're all speaking up, they're saying their minds, they're not afraid to say anything.
Feeling valued.
Yeah, because the leader is empathetic, the leader is listening, the leader, him or herself, is more self-realised, more socially aware of their behaviour. And so when you start to enact, or at least have some consciousness around psychological safety, you know that it's going to benefit the business because you're bringing forth people's strengths. So people know when to step back because they don't have the talent for that particular job. But then when something comes up where they know they're going to shine, they'll step forward and others will step back or support them.
Yes.
So it's this idea of trust.
Yeah.
And leaders shift energy when they enter a room or enter into people's presence. They shift energy and you pick up on it. And so when a leader is authoritative or hierarchical, that dampens the opportunity for people to feel safe to speak. Yeah. And so when you're enacting trust, when you've got leadership that when people trust their leaders, they'll open up more and they'll be more creative and more productive.
Yeah.
And so it starts at the top. And so because we're all influenced by who we report to and those figures of authority.
Yes.
So companies that perform well have generally people at the top that have high emotional intelligence.
Yes.
Not necessarily about being the best at their job as a craft or a skill, but they have that social intelligence.
Yeah.
And so it's that building of trust within the workplace. And then the business becomes more agile because people are willing to share information and not be so protective. So it's a feeling of trust, and people feel comfortable that they can take risks, they can fail at what they do, and people learn from that.
Yeah, I hear you. It's eliminating that fear factor and allowing people to
open up and
What advice would you give to workplaces who perhaps don't exemplify that, or have leaders who have that self-awareness and emotional intelligence? It's a tough one, but
I think it happens it can happen quite naturally with some people, but others, it is a skill that can be learnt.
Yeah.
And so if someone is recognised as not having emotional or high emotional intelligence, well, then I suggest get some training around that.
Yeah.
And the best people to ask is their team. They'll know.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, amazing. Brilliant. Yeah. Well, thank you, Anne, for sharing your wisdom.
Pleasure.
With us today. If people, say there's a workplace or corporates out there who want to make contact with you, what's the best way to do that? Do you have a website or?
I do. It's Oasis Mindfulness.
Oasis Mindfulness.
.com. Yes.
Yep.
So that would probably be the best way, or my email, which is Anne@oasismindfulness.com, ANNE.
Yep. Nice.
Yeah, so that would be 2 ways to get in touch with me.
Easy.
And because I regularly run a full day, I run a full day of mindfulness, and it's in silence.
Yep.
But at the moment, I'm doing that face to face, but I can also do that online.
That was going to be my next question.
You can do anything online now.
We can, yeah.
Anything.
Exactly right.
Yeah, it's all possible. Possible.
That's right. Anything's possible, especially when you're practicing self-awareness and mindfulness, right?
Yes. I do a hybrid online and face to face in a meditation and healing gallery in the city in Adelaide. And so we've opened that up more broadly.
Yeah.
So if you want the link, just let me know.
Yep.
So that's 12 noon Adelaide time on a Thursday. So I do a half-hour meditation.
Wow, brilliant.
So that's no charge.
Yep.
And so I do that every Thursday at 12 noon.
Right, okay.
And then I have my regular courses that you can sign up for. I'm doing one of the mindfulness-based stress reduction course, starting that February the 13th. Right. And that's 2.5 hours every week. So it's quite an intensive for 8 weeks.
All right, brilliant. And they can find all that info on your website, Anne? Yeah. All right. Well, there we have it, listeners. Thank you very much, Anne, for joining us.
Pleasure. Thanks, Paul, for having me.
Anytime. You're welcome back anytime. All the best, everyone. Remember, always keep an open mind, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you, and take care.